Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Across the Disciplines multidisciplinary panel on water security. My name is Spencer. I'm a fourth-year kinesiology student here at USask and a peer mentor at the library. So I'm going to be our moderator for today's panel. Before we begin, though, I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. So as we gather here today, we acknowledge we're on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to our First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. So before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. So please silence your phones, and the nearest washrooms are located just straight across that way. Or if you turn left after the elevators, there's another set of washrooms that can be found through the breezeway, and there's also a water bottle filling station over there as well. And so the primary purpose of this panel series today is to engage new undergraduates in considering world issues from multidisciplinary perspectives, while giving them an opportunity to contemplate their own disciplinary options or perspectives. But we welcome the whole campus community to join us in contemplating these topics of interest to our collective and present future. So if you have any topic ideas you'd like to see discussed from different disciplinary perspectives in a public forum, please approach one of our organizers. We have Candice, Alana, Nazreen, and Kathy and Joel, who are not here right now, after today's session, or email acrossthedisciplines@usask.ca with the subject panel idea so we can add it to our list of conversations. And so why water security? Water security is not only key for our future, but it is one of the major research areas here at the University of Saskatchewan. As issues of water security continue to fill our headlines, we can look to the expertise of our own campus to see our paths forward. We have the Global Institute for Water Security here, as well as various other initiatives dedicated to ensuring access to safe and clean water moving forward. So without further ado, I'll introduce each of our panelists here today. So our first panelist is going to be Matthew Taylor. Matthew is an engineer working in a water treatment plant and a PhD student in interdisciplinary studies at the University of Saskatchewan. His research focuses on co-design and decision-making processes for drinking water treatment systems on First Nations reserves with First Nations partners. And our next panelist will be Dr. Michelle Sequeira. She's an assistant professor at the College of Dentistry, where she teaches infection control and serves as the director of the sterilizer and waterline monitoring services lab. Her research specializes in dental unit waterline care, aiming to enhance water quality during dental procedures. Next will be Dr. John Pomeroy, a distinguished professor of geography and a member of the Global Institute for Water Security here at USask, a UNESCO chair in mountain sustainability and director of the Global Water Futures Program, the Global Water Futures Observatories Project, and the Center for Hydrology at the University of Saskatchewan. He is a graduate of USask Geography with his Bachelor's of Science Honors in 1983 and Agricultural Engineering, PhD in 1988, and has worked for the USDA Forest Services, University of East Anglia, Environment Canada, University of Wales, Aberystwyth, and as USask as a researcher, scientist, and professor since 1988. His research is in hydrology with particular reference to the mountains, prairies, Arctic, and to hydrological processes, observations, and modeling. And finally, Dr. Kerry McPhedran is a professor and Centennial Enhancement Chair in Water Stewardship for Indigenous Communities in the Department of Civil, Geological, and Environmental Engineering at USask, and a member of the Global Institute for Water Security. Dr. McPhedran is an award-winning environmental engineer with expertise in municipal and industrial wastewater, storm water runoff, and recreational water quality. So this is how we're going to run this afternoon's panel. Each panelist will take up to 10 minutes to discuss topics of interest related to water security in their discipline. After all presenters have finished, we'll open the floor to questions. So without further ado, Matthew, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you very much. So my name is Matthew Taylor, and I've already been introduced. I'll just get right into it. Let me just preface this discussion by saying I never actually meant to go into grad school. Like any good grad student, I was sort of convinced, talked into it by my supervisor. So I'll start a little bit about my background before my realization into grad school and how I got into the research I do today. So I did my undergraduate in chemical engineering here at the University of Saskatchewan, and I interned for a major oil and gas company for 16 months. Thought I was going to work in the oil and gas industry until I worked in the oil and gas industry. Realized it wasn't for me. I worked on a team where It was called the Corrosion Services Team. So basically, you find out why something has failed due to corrosion, make sure it doesn't happen again. And a couple of things occurred from that. So I learned a lot. It was a great team. I had a great experience, but I realized just how much oil and oil-related fluids are spilled into water every day, some of which you don't hear about. You only hear about the really big ones. And also at the same time, I was hearing about drinking water advisories on First Nations. That's when it was really, really big in the media, sort of at the forefront of the media. So I started doing some more research into it, learning about it more for myself. And I approached someone at the university who's giving a talk on the topic. And I asked, is there anything I can do with you? We can work on together. And that turned out to be my supervisor now, Dr. Lori Bradford. And she got us to work on sort of a literature review of drinking water values in literature. So looking back at past media, looking at just papers, that sort of thing. And eventually the question came, do you want to do a master's? So I was resistant at first, but Lori was very persistent, and I fell into a master's program. So when I was coming up for the topic for what I was going to be studying, I knew I wanted it to be related to drinking water on First Nations reserves, but I didn't know how to approach that. And I was given a lot of leeway to how to approach that from my supervisor, just how to think about it. So I started learning about how drinking water infrastructure, specifically water treatment plants, are funded on reserve. And it turns out there's really only two criteria: source water quality, so basically how you're going to treat the water based on what the water's like, and also funding availability. It doesn't consider any local community input, social values, cultural values. It really lumps First Nations all together into one Indigenous culture, but First Nations are very obviously very distinct, very separate cultures on reserve, even within cultures. For example, there's different values held by elders, different values held by youth. So not including First Nations in the design and implementation of water treatment plants really leads to a sort of almost a resistance to that water treatment plant. So there's access to water, which is good, but there's definitely implications for social and cultural health. For example, I was reading in literature one time about this Inuk woman out east who didn't want to drink water treated by reverse osmosis because she believed it would remove the spirit of the water and kill the water. So naturally, she didn't want to drink it. But the formulas put forth by Indigenous Services Canada to fund water treatment systems within her reserve don't consider her beliefs. So she's faced with two choices: to either drink water that goes against her beliefs, or to find a new source of drinking water, neither of which is fair to her. I said, this topic's very, very interesting. How about we consider how to better co-design drinking water infrastructure policy on reserve with First Nations partners? And so my supervisor said, great, that's a great idea. So how I've been approaching that now is I've been traveling out to different reserves, mostly in Saskatchewan, meeting with First Nations partners, so drinking water, treatment operators, counselors, that sort of thing, and asking, so what would you like included in these formulas? How can we make these better suited to you, to your community, not just all First Nations are one homogenous culture? And boy, have I had a lot of answers. It's like, we're very happy to contribute to something that's going to be affecting us, of course. So besides the technical aspects, so maybe looking at technologies that are more effective at treating water, there's a lot more kind of social cultural aspects that I was hearing about. For example, I was listening to one of the operators talk about this proprietary water treatment system, and they believed that it would work best when the ground was blessed beforehand, and also when it was installed north to south. The reasoning I'm not still 100% sure of, but I'm still learning about it. But obviously those sort of decisions and those sort of factors aren't considered in drinking water infrastructure. So what I'm doing going forward, I have a few interviews left. I've interviewed about 20 drinking water treatment operators. and counselors, and eventually we're kind of hitting a boundary where everyone's starting to have the same themes of what they're saying. So after that, everyone who's interviewed will be invited into a sharing circle to just to meet with each other, to contribute, and to validate what everyone else has said. In terms of water security, what water security means to me, at the very basis is just access to safe, clean, reliable drinking water. But the work that I've been looking into is going one step beyond that. So it's very basic to have access to clean drinking water, but it's going beyond it in having access to drinking water in a culturally safe and relevant way, in a way that you want to have access to it, right? You're the one drinking the water, so why shouldn't it be the way you want it to be consumed, to be treated, that sort of thing. So that's definitely a part of research I didn't expect to get into. So as Spencer mentioned, my undergraduate's in engineering, and I also work full-time as an engineer for a company. We mostly do water treatment for mining companies. But I didn't expect to fall into the social sciences for my discipline. I expected to very much stay in the technical aspects, but I'm finding that a lot of technical professionals don't necessarily have a strong social sciences background or have this sort of curiosity or interest even. So another thing I'm looking at going beyond, so this, I'm considering this research as kind of more of a case study of social and cultural sciences and engineering design. But what I'm also very interested in is how do engineers and public policy professionals learn to work with people and their needs? So obviously those two disciplines are very people-centric, they're very deliverables. This is what you have, other people are going to be using it. But from my experience, we don't learn a whole lot about what people want or how to work within those parameters, those guidelines that they have. So engineers are obviously very well trained in the technical aspects, but not so much the social aspects of how can we deliver this more effectively in a way that you want. So what I've started looking at is looking at the curricula of engineering and public policy programs in the group of 15 research universities, also known as the U15, seeing, so how do engineers and and public policy professionals learn to work with people and their needs? What social and cultural science requirements are there in order for these people to graduate? As it turns out, it's very inconsistent, and it's often very, very distantly related to the direct practice of engineering. It's almost more of a checking the box than an actual, this is how you can integrate it into your engineering practice. So potential steps moving forward is maybe developing some sort of course or guideline on how to actually work within people's needs. Better understand, especially working with Indigenous partners, understanding, asking these questions. So what social and cultural values do you have that could be incorporated into this design? How can we work best for you? I know myself as an engineer, I don't ask those questions enough. And I shouldn't have to have a PhD or pursuing a PhD in order to know to ask those questions, right? So that's just something I'm working on. But overall, I'm hoping that once this research is complete, moving forward and having better trained engineers and public policy professionals, knowing how to ask these questions will ultimately give back to water security. It'll teach people how to work better with people needing drinking water. And I think I've hit the yellow card. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, for that talk. Perfect. So we'll go on to our next speaker, Dr. Sakara.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here. So as mentioned before, I'm an assistant professor in the dental school, and my area of expertise in my dental ward is water. So a lot of people won't really think about connections between water security, and going to the dentist. But there's actually a lot of connections that I will explain, and I'll talk a little bit about what I do. So every time that you go to the dentist to receive dental treatment, there's water being placed in your mouth. So water it's a very important part of the dental treatment because the instruments that we use to drill teeth will produce heat. And that heat is very damaging to teeth and can actually kill your teeth if there's no water to cool the teeth down. So we have to control which kind of water is going in the mouth. So we are not causing people to actually get sick from the water being used in dental treatment. So there's a few issues that are very important and we have to pay attention when we are looking into the water used in dental treatment. First of all is the water source that we are using. So are we using water from the tap from the community? Is that water safe to drink? It might look very obvious that we have to look into that, and then if there's a water boiling advisory or if the water is not deemed safe to drink, that water won't be used for the dental treatment. They will look for a different source. However, based on the research that my group did in some rural communities, that's not actually the case. So people won't make that connection that if the water is not deemed safe for consumption, it shouldn't be used for other things, like dental treatment, for example. So it doesn't matter which kind of cleaning procedures and things that we do in the chair to try to enhance the quality of their water. If we start with bad water, the end result will always be contaminated water going into the patient's mouth, which could be dangerous, especially when we are looking into patients that are immunocompromised, and also staff that are working around the patients, because we do produce a lot of aerosol, and the water that is going in the mouth will form some aerosol and will be floating in the air, so people will be breathing that. So that's an issue. The second issue that we have related to water will be good water being placed in the chair, but water being stagnant inside the chair for long periods of time. So the water that we use for dental treatment doesn't have to be sterile. It's okay to have some sort of contamination, just like the water that we drink. However, if that water stays stagnant for long periods of time inside those dental unit water lines that we have in the chair, biofilm, which is bacteria, will start growing, and then once that gets mature, it will be directly to the patient's mouth. Again, even if the water was good to begin with, it will become contaminated there, and it could pose some health risk to the patients and to the staff. And there's also a third problem that could also directly affect the quality of the water. So the instruments that we use for dental treatment, they will have some kind of backflow. So some of the water and the saliva from the patient's mouth will come back to the chair, to the water lines on the chair. So we are bringing, again, contamination from one part of the chair back to the water lines, again, encouraging that biofilm growth. So we have to have very strong protocols and be very diligent with what we do, or we may be causing disease to our patients there. So it's very important for dentists and oral health care providers to be on the top of those protocols, also to be testing the water quality of the water that they have. So in Saskatchewan, every dental clinic has to test the water quality once a year. That's a great start, but certainly not enough, because we could have great water today and contamination 2-3 months from now, and it will take many months to find out that the water was not in the conditions that was supposed to be. So that's a problem. And also, we need to focus here on education as well, from the oral health care providers and also from the dentist and from the oral health care providers. So that's a new subject that was not really discussed years ago. So a lot of those individuals were never trained to act on those protocols, to understand what the dangers are, and to look into ways to have better quality water in their clinics. So education is key. So first of all, understand the kind of water that you are using. If you are in a place that there's a lot of boiling water advisories, or that you don't really trust, or you don't drink that water, you should be finding a different source of water to put in your chair to use for your patients. That water that could be compromised should never be your first or even your last choice to put, because you might be putting people at risk there. So the first thing that we normally tell those rural clinics will be to use store-bought water, for example, or to have a distiller, so they can have better water quality there. The second one will be to understand your system and have protocols in place. So we do have protocols to try to get rid of the stagnant water and also the backflow. So for example, we advise every dental clinic to do first thing in the morning before they see patients to flush their water lines for 2 minutes. So we get rid of the stagnant water that was there overnight or over the weekend. Also, during periods of closure, so for example, during vacation time, to empty the water bottle used in the dental unit to make sure the system is dry, so we don't have that stagnant water forming biofilm over and over. The third one will be to have additional systems. So for example, we have mild disinfectant that we can use in the chair. We have filters. We have other ways to try. It won't, if the water is already contaminated, it won't solve your problem, but it will make the water safer for longer if you start with good water. So it's good to have those extra systems in place. Also have monthly or every few months protocols where you give a shock in the chair with a stronger disinfectant to get rid of all the biofilm that you have been accumulating there, and to test the water quality often so you catch those issues early on so your patients are not exposed to the biofilm and to the contamination that you have there. So, I mean, it's a lot and it's a new subject. So training and having all those professionals being updated and understanding what's going on, it's key. It's a subject that is talked a lot by the CDC in the United States. The regulation over there is tighter than what we have here. But hopefully we can change the policies slowly by showing what's going on here and what contaminated water can actually mean for our patients. There are cases of clinics in the United States that had to be shut down because they were using contaminated water, and a large number of patients end up in the hospital, for example, because they might have some really pathogenic bacteria going on in their biofilm there. So those can lead to lawsuits. It's very damaging for the clinic, obviously, because people talk, and who will want to go back to a clinic that was shut down because of that? So I think it's kind of a wake-up call, and I think it's a subject that we should continue to look and finding easy and effective ways to maintain that water quality and to make sure that those protocols are easy to follow. Because if we start complicating things a lot, people will just skip it and will do the bare minimum just because they have to do. So my project is related to that. We did look into a database from my lab that we had from the past 11 years, and we find out that in Saskatchewan, 30% of all the dental practices were either failing or nearly failing water quality from their chairs. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah. It's something that has to be looked carefully, and we should continue to develop good protocols to ensure that we work in a safe environment for everyone, and the patient won't leave your chair with a disease that the patient didn't have when they sat there. So I think that's the goal. And yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Sekera, for sharing your expertise today. Next, we'll open the floor to Dr. Pomeroy.
Okay, hello. So I've been studying water at the University of Saskatchewan, I checked, since 1981. When I was an undergraduate student here, I had an opportunity to work for the geography department on a study they had for baseline study of Meewasin Valley River resources. The Meewasin Valley Authority was brand new, and they wanted a study to see, okay, what was in the river valley. And it was great. It was a great opportunity as an undergraduate student because I got to look at the hydrology of the river, how fast is the water moving, what are the flows, the seasonality of the flows, how are they affected by Gardner Dam, which is 100 kilometers upstream to the south. What are the water quality parameters in the river at the time? And at the time, you could dip a cup into the South Saskatchewan River upstream of town, and it passed all the water quality standards right out of the river. I wouldn't do it now, but so things have changed. But further, what were the aquatic vegetation and terrestrial vegetation along the riverbank corridor? What were the some of the species, the fish, the beavers, and others that were inhabiting the river valley? And then what recreational use do we make of the river? And then finally, what was the aesthetic impact of the river on the city, the beauty that it brought to our environment? And so we studied all of that. So that was a great opportunity. And looking back, I'd say, oh, that was a water security study. But we didn't know the word then, and the concept hadn't been put together in that sense. One thing that came out of that study was a hydraulics aspect, which was calculating the probability of the stream flow velocities exceeding the velocity at which a human can swim. And it turned out it was fairly high, and what came out of that was a recommendation: don't swim in the river. There were great plans for beaches and swimming beaches along the river, and that would have resulted in a lot of casualties. So the other, though, was to maintain the luxuriant vegetation along the river and be very careful with the built environment along the riverbank, because Saskatoon has exceptional aesthetic quality to its riverbank developments, but we also found that that was very vulnerable to new buildings and developments that didn't fit in with the fairly natural aspect of that riverbank. I think the MVA and the city have mostly held to that over time. They continue to extend parks and other things that provided great recreation. But anyway, going forward, focused on hydrology. So what's hydrology? Well, it's the science of the water cycle and really how precipitation as snowfall and rainfall is converted by a river basin into soil moisture and runoff and stream flow generation and groundwater. But there are also the environmental connections that occur there through plants, through various animals and fish, and then the water quality aspects, and also how humans manage it. Human agricultural and urban civilizations have all been water management civilizations. I was just in China, and they were showing me their flood control systems going back 5,000 years, which is kind of stunning, but that made life possible, and the flooding for rice paddy cultivation and all that was done through human interventions. Similarly, in the Middle East and the Indus and Ganges valleys in South Asia, the irrigation using water was essential for continuing to have successful agriculture as the region began to dry out after the end of the ice ages. And so, and the Nile Valley, of course, very famous there, with an exotic river, the Nile, flowing through a very arid region, but tremendous fertility possible through irrigation development. So humans have been doing this for a long time, not always well. We occasionally mess up, and then a civilization will collapse in ancient history because of drought and things like that, and maybe, so we have to be careful with it. Moving forward, though, it's very interesting in Saskatchewan because we often tend to take our water resources for granted here and think that we have plenty. And yeah, we have thousands and thousands of lakes in the northern part of the province and tremendous rivers flowing through it, but we are a semi-arid region where most people in Saskatchewan live. And we have a long winter, which has a number of consequences. One, if we didn't have that long winter and we had only the 350 millimeters of precipitation that Saskatoon has, we would be a desert. We're drier than Arizona here, actually. But that because our liquid water is concentrated into a few months in the summer, we can stay fairly green. The second, though, is that our agriculture struggles here. It's possible, but it really couldn't flourish until the 20th century, and even more recently as agricultural techniques have caught up with appropriate ways to manage water in this semi-arid cold region, which is quite unique in many ways. And so dryland agriculture is tremendously difficult here, but getting better and better over time as we manage water better. Finally, though, we also are like the Nile. We have exotic rivers moving through the prairies. The Saskatchewan River system, if you look at the South Saskatchewan River through Saskatoon, it only picks up 1% of its stream flow in the province of Saskatchewan, a little bit out of Swift Current Creek. There's not much else. It's receiving the bulk of its flow in the Rocky Mountains, 700-800 kilometers to the west of here. And so managing that water, we have to be very, very careful. We have one river really to the southern part of the province, the North Saskatchewan branch in the northern part, also similarly an exotic river in this sense. And 70% of Saskatchewan's population gets its drinking water from the South Saskatchewan system, a bit more from the north, because it's diverted out of Lake Diefenbaker into Buffalo Pound Lake that provides water for Regina, Moose Jaw, and the Qu'Appelle River system. And so we actually have a bit of vulnerability there. I'd say our water security is not particularly high. If that river's in trouble, we're in big trouble. We don't have alternative sources. Our groundwater tends to be high in dissolved solids. Its quality isn't very good, and it's not being recharged particularly quickly anywhere in the province. A lot of it was laid down even before the Ice Age. So we're very reliant on that river water, and we have many, many uses for it. Our growing cities, our irrigation districts, the aquatic ecosystems. The Saskatchewan River Delta is the largest inland freshwater delta in North America and supports not only muskrat and beaver, but the indigenous populations of Cumberland House in that region. And so there's lots that river does in providing services all the way through. And it's important that we look after it. We also have the largest dam in the prairies, Gardner Dam, and the Lake Diefenbaker development from the 1960s there. And a lot of debate right now about how to further develop that with irrigation, but also what else should we be doing with it? How much hydroelectricity should we be generating there? Can we secure water supplies for Saskatoon, Regina, and other communities from it? And provide water for potash mines and other things. And these are very difficult questions. Why? Because we are undergoing the most rapid climate change in millions of years, and certainly since the time that humans as a modern species have been on the planet. And so we've already experienced temperature rises in Saskatchewan of close to 2 degrees Celsius. So the 1.5 the UN is talking about, worrying about crossing, we've already crossed it because that's a global average, but here we're warming a bit faster, and we're liable to warm another 6 to 7 degrees by the end of the century at the rate at which greenhouse gases have been increasing in the atmosphere. That puts us in trouble because that long winter that keeps us green is going to get a lot shorter, and the looks like in most models there'll be an increase in precipitation, mostly as rainfall, mostly in the spring, but it won't be enough. So our models and predictive systems show soil moisture levels dropping dramatically in late summer, river levels dropping about half what they are in late summer, but spring peaks often higher. So irony of having floods and droughts at the same time in the same system would be more frequent. So these are tremendous challenges for us going forward because we have a growing province. We have more recently recognized issues of equity around our water resources and how we allocate them. It's not all going to go into irrigation. It's not all going to go into conservation, but we have to strike a balance there. And we have to do so in a way with tremendous unknowns and under uncertainty in the predictions and uncertainty in the water management decisions that can be made there. We also have at the same time water quality degradation from nutrient inputs from agricultural runoff, as well as aspects of longer summers and more open water in the ponds. So Buffalo Pound Lake struggles, the water treatment plant there struggles to treat the water adequately for Regina Moose Jaw because of harmful algal blooms and blue-green algae, which can be toxic. And this is also a factor of many water bodies across the prairies. So we're confronted with water quality, quantity problems, growing population, challenging management, and Alberta's upstream, and there's nothing saying they have to share with us, so except a voluntary agreement. So I'll stop there, but lots of interesting things for us to deal with.
Thank you, Dr. Pomeroy. Next up, we'll hear from Dr. McPhedran.
Thanks. So I also started my academic journey, I guess, as an undergraduate. I started in the mid-90s. I was in biology. I wanted to be a dentist, and then at some point I decided against it. Sorry, Michelle. After volunteering for a couple weeks. I had in fourth year, I was a TA. I always suggest TAs were always good because I had a prof come up to me and ask me if I was interested in doing a master's degree. And that's where I started my water security journey. I did my MSc in working with invasive species in Lake Ontario. I'm originally from the deep South Windsor, Ontario of Canada. And so I was working on that, and I was TAing another course, and Edwin Tam, Dr. Edwin Tam came into the class. He was an environmental engineer, and he sold me on switching to environmental engineering after I was done. I was gung-ho because I liked the idea of working on water-related problems that I could actually solve in, say, in a lab or in the field somewhere. So I started in that direction. Only wanting to do an undergrad in environmental engineering, so especially undergraduate students always know you can meander your path somewhere, and then got kind of roped into doing a PhD too from another supervisor who was I was easily swayed, I guess, and so that's where I ended up in municipal wastewater. Fast forward to coming out here, water security issues out in the West. I worked in Alberta for a couple years as a postdoc, working in oil sands process affected water, a major issue that's still ongoing. And then I joined here in 2015. I work primarily in industrial wastewater, still some stormwater treatment work, and municipal wastewater work as well. And so I'm just going to touch upon each one of those and various projects we're working on for each one of those areas. I do work with First Nations as well, as evidenced by the long title that I was given. And a lot of overlap with the first speaker here with Laurie Bradford. We do a lot of work with Indigenous communities as well. Well, I'll focus on those other three right now and then see where we go with that. So industrial wastewater, we have lots of mining here in the province, right? So we have lots of residual wastewaters that need to be dealt with before they're returned to the environment. And so a better idea for us now, which I didn't get to do with oil sands process affected water, was you treat the water and then you just return it, and you don't have any value added kind of value from that. Now we're switching to kind of what can we do with what we retrieve from that water. And so working with a potash company in Saskatchewan, we're looking to actually not only treat the water, but get a value added product from it using membrane distillation crystallization process, and coming up with using renewable sources to make those membranes. And so everything's value added. Can we take something out of the water, treat it, use it for irrigation purposes perhaps? It's very high in salt, and so the idea is to knock down those salts, take them out, and then potentially sell them. And so really multidisciplinary. I never know the difference between interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary. I knew it at some point, but very multidisciplinary work research. We have chemistry. I have chemists on my team, chemical engineers, environmental engineers working in that area, as it's we need all of those folks, and then even within the engineering realm, we need mechanical engineers, electrical engineers to make these, to make the products that we make, at a bigger scale, as well as to help us, make them cost feasible, because any of these companies, sure, they have to treat their water, but they want to do it very cheaply, right? And so, which makes sense that they're in the business of making money. So that's the first one with industrial wastewater treatment. And I also work with a couple other mining companies on arsenic and selenium type issues, which are big ones across the province and across the world. The next one I wanted to quickly talk about is stormwater management. We have in Saskatoon, in Canada, in Saskatoon we have separate stormwater systems. And we have over 100 outfalls that go straight into the river. We have this misconception that stormwater is rainwater that's nice and clean. It's actually a lot dirtier than the municipal wastewater that goes into our plant. Imagine everything that you have in your car, your brakes have metals in them, your tires have tire particles in them, you have oil leaking on the ground, you have gas leaking on the ground, you have all sorts of things going in that stormwater. It all sits there, and we're in a semi-arid region, as John mentioned, and so a lot of it sits there and accumulates. All of a sudden we have a rainfall, all of that comes in a big shock into the river. And so we were working on an interdisciplinary team working with toxicology and assessing what the impact of that big pulse of this water going into the river is. And the bigger cities get, the more that pulse is. And so now we're looking at how can we treat that. So a lot of people may live on a community that has a pond in it now. In all our new subdivisions, we have stormwater ponds across the prairies and across the world now, and that's our solution to collecting that water. And so the one project we're working with City with 4 PhD students, again, is looking at their stormwater ponds. We have over 30 wet ponds in the city. But those are collecting. Imagine all of the stormwater coming in there. The water coming out is supposed to be treated. That may or may not be the case. A lot of these ponds over time, they fill up with all these sediments. And you can imagine all of those particles and everything that's in that water is now toxic. And so before we knew any better, we would just dredge them and put them on land somewhere. But now we realize that they're toxic, and more regulations are coming so that we need to address that toxicity. We can't just dredge. So even the city of Saskatoon acknowledged that they have quite a big liability coming forward, and they want to try and treat those stormwater ponds. And so what we're doing is we have civil engineers mapping these ponds to see where flows are going, how the particles are setting. Environmental engineer and one student working on as a chemical engineer, trying to assess how we could treat that water in situ, perhaps, again, using things like agriculturally based biochars that we create. Basically, any product that we could get that's inexpensive or free that we could create to basically go in there and suck up everything for us, and that way when we take out the sediments, we won't have to put them in a toxic waste facility, which is expensive. So that's a big project we're working on now. We're starting with the city. Like I said, 4 PhD students working on that, and we'll have various undergraduate students as well, and a multidisciplinary team working on that. And stormwater to try and solve that problem. There are other problems with the stormwater from the inner city where we don't have those ponds and we have stuff going straight into the river. Those are, I'll take this saying from the social sciences, wicked problems, right? Because there are so many different ways of these coming into the river in so many different locations. It's almost like agricultural runoff where it's hard to treat easily. And especially in Saskatoon, where we have them along the river and we're flat. Some areas are benefiting with hills where you could collect at the bottom, but for us, the stormwater is a challenging one. And then the last one I'll talk about is municipal wastewater. I did that during my PhD. In Canada, our wastewater treatment plants, largely the water coming into them from the river is dirtier than the water coming out of the plant. We have high regulations for them. It's not like that everywhere around the world, but we do have chemicals of concern that we don't monitor for. A lot of people ask, like, why don't we monitor for everything? Well, we don't know what we don't know, right? So a lot of these chemicals are new chemicals to commerce, pharmaceutical chemicals that may or may not break down. They get into the water bodies and they have negative impacts to the water bodies as well as users downstream. Even for those people that don't care so much about the environment, what's happening in the stream, it eventually gets back into another drinking water system somewhere else. And so we see that with a lot of our chemicals that a lot of the chemicals that we make are very durable in the environment, and they're kind of forever chemicals. And one of the big ones right now is like a PFAS, it's called, polyfluoroalkyl substances. I always get that one wrong. But those ones, types of substances that are getting in the water, and a lot of them are coming from the wastewater treatment plant. So I've worked on many projects looking at that aspect, as well as recently security issue was COVID-19. A lot of the monitoring we were doing with COVID-19 was to help inform the decision-making around the COVID-19 pandemic. But that's kind of led to kind of a renaissance of wastewater and what we're going to do. We put a lot of money into this, the COVID-19 type projects, and so now we're looking at more beneficial uses, and one of them is water reuse. So again, we're semi-arid right here. There's lots of times where we have water, we're collecting all this infrastructure and money and time and effort that we're taking water out of the river, we put it in our distribution systems, it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, then it goes back into the river. What if we just took that right back and treated it again? And so we've heard, I assume most people have heard about what happened in Calgary with a big water distribution system. Resiliency is a big thing right now, so if we could have smaller treatment systems that are more locally designed, rather than in Saskatoon we have one drinking water plant, one wastewater plant, to replicate those is, billions of dollars to do that. And so doing something on a smaller scale where we could reuse water within the community, and not to drinking water, since most people in Canada are kind of against that, although it's good enough for astronauts. They actually recycle their water, right, and drink it, and we can do that. But we can use it for things like irrigation. And so imagine a community that has a wastewater treatment plant and drinking water plant, all locally sourced. And if something breaks, they're connected to another part of the community. We have a lot more resiliency. We have better use of our infrastructure. We don't have to put the biggest pipes into the ground that always break over time. And so that's a water security issue that we're hoping to solve over time, because a lot of infrastructure is failing on us, as we know. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. McPhedran. Can we get a round of applause for all of our panelists? All right, we'll now open up the floor to any questions. I'm going to repeat each question so people watching asynchronously are able to hear as well. So are there any questions from the audience? Alana.
Thank you all very much. That was fascinating. My question is for Dr. Seguera, but I think that it probably touches on some other people's research. But I heard about you were talking about the three issues. What I didn't hear is, what about the water after it's used and from the chair? What kind of treatment gets done to that water before it gets back into the use?
So the question was, what happens to the water in dentistry after it's used, and what kind of treatment does it go through?
It will happen the same thing when you open the tap and it goes to the sewage. Yeah, I mean, there might be beneficial to look into that, especially depending on the treatment that you are doing and what kind of chemicals or substances are there. But currently, to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing being done on that. What we do is when we are dealing with amalgam, that silver filling, that won't go to the wastewater. We have a separate place, because we do have to send for disposal. But other than that, there's not much being done. Thank you.
Awesome. Are there any other questions from the audience? Go here first.
Okay, I guess this is a question for you, Dr. McPhedran. I was just in New Mexico, and I went to one of those earthship houses, and they collect rainwater, and they use it and they treat it for drinking, but then they recycle the water and have brown water used for the toilets, and then they recycle the water one more time and use it for watering plants. Is thinking along that line, like, what kind of shift would we have to undergo in our cities to rethink about using potable drinking water on lawns and things like that? Is that something that cities could actually adjust to, is thinking about potable water versus brown water?
So the question was for Dr. McPhedran, and it was asking about recycling water and using non-potable water. What kind of shifts would cities have to make?
So there is a lot of talk about it in Canada, and in each province it's different as well. I think Alberta has just had their reuse, they've mirrored what's happening in California. And so we're always following other jurisdictions that are having it. And so there are many in the US that are already doing this. And so part of my project that I'm doing is actually the social side of things as well, getting the stakeholders and seeing what appetite there is for reuse. It is an added cost a lot of the times, right? Because you have to have separate systems. And a lot of the issue is a safety issue. So even flushing a toilet, people are worried that a kid will go in the toilet and drink that water or something, or a dog will, and get you sick. And so a lot of that is our natural. I think as Canadians, we're a little bit more cautious when it comes to stuff like that. So I think for us, a lot of the goal will be for collecting it still in maybe smaller systems, and then maybe using it for irrigation rather than trying to reuse it directly in one unit. And a lot of it is just due to that cost. It may be more cost feasible to do it that way. But any sort of reuse, so there are a lot of stakeholders that are interested in across the province. After I started, I was really quite surprised. And so so there are different ways of doing it, but individually in each household, just because of the cost, likely not going to happen, but something more on a regional scale might be something that's more feasible. but we have to go through water security agency. We have to go through all of the getting the regulations and guidelines. And I'll posit that it's not following California's lead may sound like a good thing, but it may just be never cost feasible, and that they've actually set the bar maybe too high on what has to be done, and that's just because of people's appetite for risk, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. McPhedran. Is there any other quick questions at the end here? I know we're kind of running tight on time.
Thank you very much. That was super informative and in some ways kind of scary how precarious water security is for us in Saskatchewan. So, Dr. Pomeroy, I might have a sleepless night tonight. My question is for Dr. Sekera, just because I'm very curious about this notion that the United States has tighter controls than we do. Do we have any sort of indication of the rate of infection in Canada versus the United States as secondary to some dental treatment? So are we more at a higher risk as a result of not having controls that I asked tonight?
So the question was, is there any difference in infection rates between Canada and the US, seeing as the US has tighter controls on water?
Well, it might be more reported in the United States because the regulation is tighter, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen here. A lot of the times people might get sick from the dentist, but they won't correlate that the infection that they got is actually originated in the dentist. So only when there's those larger clinics that are shut down and they go and they deeply investigate what's the origin of the contamination, then they will relate to a dental clinic. Regulation should be tighter, and we should be looking more at those numbers and understand the big picture. The problem is, especially here in Canada, every province will control their regulation, and some provinces won't have regulations at all. They will have only recommendations. So actually most of the provinces. So what we have in Saskatchewan, even though is low and it could do better, it's still pretty good compared to many other places that we have here. But hopefully things will start changing in the future as research advances.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. So unfortunately, we're kind of getting to the end of our time here. But once again, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for coming out. We actually have a card here for you as a token of appreciation. Also, the cups, the mugs you're drinking from, you are welcome to take home with you. Those are for you. So that's as well. Thank you for everyone in the audience for attending. Again, if you have any other ideas for panels you'd like to see in the future, there's the across the disciplines at usask.ca. You can email. There will also be another water security panel discussion in February next term. So if you would like to participate in that, you can visit the Across the Disciplines website to sign up and learn more and be added to the email list. So thank you again, everyone, for coming.